a Luftwaffe fighter base, somewhere in occupied Europe, early 1944. An intelligence officer stands at the front of a briefing room and holds up a photograph. The young pilots lean in. He tells them the Americans have run so short of men that they have started putting black pilots into fighter planes. Then he tells the room what to expect from them. They will not hold formation. They will not press an attack. They will run at the first sound of a cannon shell hitting metal. The room laughs. 14 months later, over Berlin, the men that briefing room laughed at would shoot 3 of Germany's fastest jet fighters out of the sky in 7 minutes. They would do it flying older propeller planes. They would do it without losing the bombers they were sent to protect. And the German ace who led that day's attack, a veteran with more than 40 kills, would be dead within 6 weeks. This is the story of the 332nd Fighter Group, the Red Tails, the most ridiculed fighter unit in the United States Army, flown by men their own country, would not let eat in the same room as the white pilots they trained beside. Everyone remembers that they proved the doubters wrong. Almost nobody remembers the part that should unsettle you. Their success was not a miracle. It was not luck, and it was not heart. It was engineered, on purpose, years in advance. And the people who should have seen it coming had spent those same years staring past the one question they had agreed never to ask. To understand why they laughed, you have to understand what they thought they knew. In 1925, the United States Army War College produced a study on how to use black soldiers in a future war. White officers wrote it, for white commanders. Its conclusions were treated as settled fact. It claimed the black soldier was easily frightened, unfit to act on his own, and could not be trusted with complicated machines. That document did not sit in a drawer. It shaped how the American Army treated its own black troops for the next 20 years. Nazi Germany did not need convincing. Hitler had already written that the presence of Africans in Europe was a crime against the white race. To the men running the Reich, an aircraft was the ultimate machine of the so-called master race, and the idea of a black man flying a modern fighter in combat was not a threat to be studied. It was a joke to be repeated. So they repeated it in briefing rooms to teenagers about to fly for their lives. And in early 1945, the men in those briefing rooms still had reason to feel untouchable. Germany had built the Messerschmitt Me 262, the first jet fighter in the world to fly in real numbers. Nothing the Allies had could catch it. It was roughly 100 miles an hour faster than the best American fighter. It carried 4 heavy cannons in the nose and rockets under the wings that could tear a bomber apart from half a mile away. The Reich called it the weapon that would win the sky back. The elite jet unit that flew it, Jagdgeschwader 7, had a simple tactic. Dive out of the high contrails at full speed, slash through the American escort fighters before they could react, fire into the bombers, and climb away before anyone could bring a gun to bear. As long as the escorts behaved the way the Germans expected, by breaking formation to chase the fast jets, the attack was almost impossible to stop. The whole plan rested on one assumption about the enemy: that the escort pilots would chase. That assumption was about to run into the one group of American pilots who had been ordered, on pain of disgrace, never to chase anything. They flew from a base called Ramitelli on the Adriatic coast of Italy. Their P-51 Mustangs had the tails painted bright crimson, so the bomber crews could pick them out at a glance. Every pilot in the group was African American. And here is the detail that turns the whole story over. The Army Air Forces had decided that a black man could become a military pilot only if he already had a college education. A white teenager could walk into a recruiting office with a high school diploma and a driver's license and be in a training cockpit within 3 months. A black applicant needed 2 years of college just to be considered. The rule was meant to keep the numbers small. Instead, it built the most overeducated fighter group in the entire American Air Force. These were not desperate last-minute replacements. They were graduate students, engineers, and school teachers who had to be better than everyone else just to earn a seat. Their commander was Colonel Benjamin Davis, Jr. He had gone to West Point, the most prestigious military academy in America, and for 4 straight years, not one fellow cadet would speak to him outside of duty. They ate near him in silence. They left him to room alone. The point was to break him and force him out. It failed. He graduated near the top of his class, and he came out of those 4 years with something his classmates never meant to give him: patience, the ability to take an insult, stay calm, and keep flying straight. When Davis took command, he gave his pilots one order that cut against everything a fighter pilot is taught to want. Do not leave the bombers, not to chase a kill, not to run down a fleeing enemy, not to become a famous ace. If a bomber under your protection goes down because you went hunting for personal glory, do not bother coming back. It was almost an unnatural thing to ask. A fighter pilot lives for his kill count. Because of that order, the 332nd would finish the war with almost no recognized aces, while nearly every other group was full of them. It also built a reputation that traveled through the bomber crews of southern Italy by word of mouth. The crews began asking for the group with the red tails by name. When they saw those crimson tails slide into formation beside them at 27,000 feet, they had their own name for them: the Red Tail Angels. None of that had reached the German briefing rooms. The Luftwaffe was still telling its pilots a joke from 1939. On the 24th of March, 1945, the 15th Air Force flew the longest escort mission it would ever attempt: 1,600 miles, from Italy to Berlin and back, to hit a tank engine factory in the south of the city. The kind of distance the German High Command had insisted, only 2 years earlier, no single-engine fighter could ever cover. The Red Tails launched before 8 in the morning and climbed east over the sea. Far to the north, near Berlin, a flight of Me-262 jets sat under camouflage netting at the edge of a cratered runway, waiting for the bombers to come to them. One of those jets belonged to a German ace with 48 kills. Almost all of them won in the east against poorly trained Soviet pilots in obsolete aircraft. He knew exactly how to kill men who were already losing. He was about to meet men who were not. The jets came down a little after noon. The first pass worked the way it always worked. A jet dropped out of the high sky, fired one burst, and a flying fortress fell out of formation. The German ace had his 49th kill. It was also his last. Because watching that jet was a 332nd pilot named Roscoe Brown, and Brown had been briefed on the one weakness the fastest fighter in the world could not fix. The Me-262 was helpless when it was slow. Its engines could not be throttled up quickly. Push the throttle forward too fast, and they simply died. And below about 320 miles an hour, its wide turning circle made it handle more like a heavy bomber than a fighter. The briefings back at Ramitelli had circled that number in red. Do not chase the jet at full speed. You will never catch it. Wait, the jet always has to slow down to aim. The moment it slows, it is yours. Brown waited. He had fuel to spare and a stack of bombers below him he had been ordered to protect, which meant the jet in front of him was not a trophy. It was an obstacle. When the German pilot bled off speed to line up another bomber, Brown rolled his Mustang onto its back, pulled down through the turn, and came out behind the jet at well over 400 miles an hour. He opened fire from close range. 6 machine guns put more than 100 rounds a second into the jet's engine and fuselage. The left engine tore apart. The aircraft came to pieces in the air. 90 seconds later, a second red tail, Charles Brantley killed a second jet the same way, by waiting. A few minutes after that, a third pilot, Earl Lane, killed a third. Three of the fastest combat aircraft on Earth shot down in 7 minutes by propeller planes flown by men the German Air Force had assured its pilots were too cowardly to fight. The bombers held formation. The factory was hit. Every bomber the Red Tails were covering that day flew on toward home. It is tempting to call a day like that a miracle. It was the opposite of a miracle. It was arithmetic. By 1945, the German Air Force was burning through pilots faster than it could train them. In the months around the invasion of Normandy, the Luftwaffe lost more than 1,000 trained fighter pilots. The boys sent to replace them reached frontline squadrons with barely 100 hours of flying time, sometimes only 10 of them in the actual fighter they would die in. After the war, the famous German fighter General Adolf Galland summed it up without flinching. The Americans, he admitted, had trained their pilots to an astonishingly high standard. His own pilots, he said, were children. Now look at the other side of that equation. The average red-tail pilot reached the front with more than 400 hours in the air, over 200 of them in the Mustang itself, and a college education on top of it. While Germany fed teenagers into jets, the United States was graduating new fighter pilots faster than the enemy could shoot them down, and every one of those graduates had spent more time in training than the German pilots they would face had spent flying in their entire lives. The men of the 332nd were the sharpest end of that. Because the Army had demanded they be overqualified, they were. They had been drilled in navigation, in engineering, in the fine detail of how their aircraft actually worked, the kind of knowledge that turns a good pilot into a dangerous one. They were not a scrappy underdog squad that won on courage alone. They were one of the most thoroughly trained fighter groups in the American Air Force, flying the best propeller fighter in the world under a commander who had handed them a tactic built precisely to beat the German jet attack. Their success was not improbable. It was engineered. The improbable part lived somewhere else. It lived in the gap between the men America was actually putting in the cockpit and the men Nazi doctrine insisted could not exist. For 4 years, German intelligence had carefully tracked American factory output, fuel, and shipping. It never once filed a useful report on who the Americans were actually sending up to fight, because the answer did not fit on their map of the human race. The clearest verdict came from the man who built the German Air Force. In the summer of 1945, Hermann Göring sat in a bare interrogation room, his medals stripped away, answering questions from a senior American air commander. He was asked when he first understood that Germany had lost control of the sky. He did not hesitate. He had been thinking about it for months. It was, he said, when the American long-range fighters began escorting the bombers deep into Germany, as far as Hanover, and then to Berlin. That, he said, was when they knew they had to build the jets. The jets came, and the jets were not enough because the men flying the escort would not break. That was the thing the Luftwaffe never solved. In a German fighter unit, every pilot was chasing his own kill count. In the Red Tails by order, not one of them was. One of those two cultures sent men out to win personal glory. The other sent men out to bring bombers home. Over Berlin on the 24th of March, you could see exactly which one won. In the 3 seconds it took Roscoe Brown to ignore a fleeing ace and wait for the kill that actually mattered. By the end of the war, the 332nd had destroyed more than 100 enemy aircraft in the air, wrecked hundreds more on the ground, and even crippled an enemy warship with nothing but machine gun fire. They did all of it while producing almost no aces at all. That single statistic was the one the German Air Force could never make sense of, because it described a discipline their doctrine swore these men were incapable of. Then they came home, and home had not changed at all. The men who had just beaten the best the Luftwaffe could put in the sky returned to a country that still made them use separate doors. Colonel Davis came back to officers' clubs he was forbidden to enter. Pilots who had shot down German fighters were refused a cup of coffee while still in uniform. The same men trusted with a frontline fighter over Berlin could be arrested for sitting in the wrong seat on a bus in Alabama. But the record they had written was harder to bury than the men themselves. After the war, the Army studied its own numbers, and the numbers would not cooperate with the old story. The escort losses, the combat record. Göring's own words about the long-range fighters. It was all there, in the files, in black and white. On the 26th of July, 1948, President Harry Truman signed an executive order committing the United States military to equal treatment regardless of race. The order that set the desegregation of the armed forces in motion. It did not mention the 332nd Fighter Group by name. It did not have to. The men who put that policy on the president's desk had the combat statistics in front of them. They understood what those numbers had cost the men who earned them, and what the old 1925 doctrine would cost the country if it were allowed to outlive the people who had just disproved it. The German ace who led the attack on March 24th was killed 3 weeks later, flying the same jet. Shot down by another Mustang, flown by another American pilot whose name the Luftwaffe never bothered to write down. His jet outlived him. It sits in a museum near Washington today, polished and lit, with a placard explaining how advanced it was. What the placard does not explain is who beat it. It does not say that the fastest fighter of the war was brought down over Berlin by men in older planes, men whose own government made them earn a college degree for the right to be doubted, men that a room full of German pilots a year earlier had laughed at. That briefing room is gone, the laughter is gone, the aircraft are still here, and standing between them, you do not need anyone to explain who was right. If this is the kind of history you wish they had taught you, subscribe. The next story is about another machine, and another group of men everyone wrote off, until the day they stopped being able to.